Good morning. So it's May 6th, 2016, and I know the picture isn't good, so don't worry about it, just listen. So mindfulness training on the way up, because it's dark and you have to pay attention. Mindfulness essentially is being aware of what you're doing, where you are, even if you're just sitting. And of course that includes the local environment. Now, that leads us to, bear with me here, to a much bigger picture, okay? So, if mindfulness is including your local environment, because you have to pay attention to what you're doing, where you are, then the assumption is that you are part and parcel of your local environment. So I've mentioned this before, that one of the reasons why people stand out in the woods is because they believe that they are separate. They have this unconscious inherent belief that they don't necessarily belong out here. They forget that they are a natural creature in nature. Now, I don't mean that you have to go all primitive, but simply that you have to remember what you are. When you start doing this, when you recall that you are part of nature as opposed to separate, then what happens is we get into this idea of ego dissolution. And I'm using the term dissolution instead of ego death because I have a tendency to think of it like ripples on a pond. Sure, when I'm crashing and bumbling through the woods and everything else, I'm making a lot of noise, I'm disturbing the environment, and this sends out waves of sound and energy, and it echoes because all of the environment, the birds, the animals, are also paying attention to me, and their behavior changes, and so on and so forth. So essentially you get a butterfly effect for the entire area, right? And who knows how far it goes. However, you have to understand that everything else is making those ripples too. So the cars on the freeway that I can hear even though they're a couple miles distant, you know, the birds chirping, the wind that's blowing, all of these things are too. You're not the only thing making these ripples. You are a part of the natural world. And the thing is, when you start to identify with that, then what happens is you begin to identify less with yourself and more with the local environment. And as you begin to identify more with the local environment, you become less and less visible as a discrete entity. Now, that may only be a trick in your own mind. It's entirely possible. You know, how could you even test this? I don't know. However, the point is, this is one of the things that philosophers, mystics, etc. are talking about. You begin to identify with something bigger. Now, this can lead to larger and larger areas of environment until you're identifying, well, with all of creation, with the entire universe. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that that's a goal. However, I am saying that this is one of the ways in which that process can be accomplished. When you do that, when you're not identifying with your physical body so much as with greater and greater areas of nature, then what happens is you become less identified with the problems that you had as yourself. So whatever those happen to be, death and taxes. And that is one of the gifts of mindfulness, is you begin to put things in perspective. Now, a lot of people think that this is an end stage, right? That once you've experienced enlightenment, oneness with the universe, etc., that your work is done. It's simply not the case, because you are still here. You're still you. You're still incarnate. The problem is that once your ego got inflated, you know, to the size of the entire galaxy, you know, can you bring it back down to size? Or are you aware that your ego is simply an illusion, a perception of consciousness? Think of it as a state instead of a stage. Now, I don't remember who I got that terminology from, perhaps Bill Trumpler, perhaps Jay Leslie, or perhaps Jason Miller, I don't recall. But if you think of it as a state, I experienced this state of ego dissolution for a moment. and then I came back, then you become less attached to both states, where you are presently, your normal everyday waking self, and where you are when you're bigger. And non-attachment, well, that is the goal for a lot of practices. So that's something else to keep in mind as well. So anyway, thoughts on May 6th, the sunrise. I'll be posting some pictures on Facebook because it was gorgeous, and the day is gorgeous. And I'm going to go spend the day with my wife because it was our anniversary this week. So I'll catch you next time.